The Pheu Thai party ruled Thailand until a military coup 4 years ago. Now its members are accused of violating a ban on political activities and they could go to jail. The army has promised elections next year, but what hope is there for democracy in Thailand? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. It's been 4 years since the ruling Pheu Thai party was removed from power, but the crackdown on its members continues, with a number of them now charged for breaking a ban on political activity. They streamed a news conference live on Facebook, criticising Thailand's military rulers and campaigned for the army or junta to hold a general election. After repeated postponements, the army has promised elections next year. We'll talk to our guests in a moment, but first, Wayne Hay reports from Bangkok.
By fighting for wider freedoms, protesters in Thailand are risking their own. Political gatherings have been banned since the coup 4 years ago. The leaders of this protest group have repeatedly defied the military government and have been charged with sedition, which could see them jailed for up to 7 years. Their rallies have been relatively small so far, but have provided the most visible sign of resistance since the coup.
The ultimate goal is to have the free and fair election as early as possible, because the longer that takes, the more opportunities for the junta to prolong their power as planned after the election.
Thailand's military leaders have promised elections several times since removing the democratically elected government in 2014. The latest proposed date for a vote is February next year, but there are murmurings of yet another delay. Even after an election is held, the military will still hold a lot of power. They'll hand-pick senators to sit in the upper house of parliament, and there's even the possibility of an unelected prime minister. That person could be the current prime minister, the army general who led the coup. Pheu Thai hasn't committed either way to the idea of staying on after the next election, but he appears to be in campaign mode already. He held a large rally in the northeast 2 weeks ago, seemingly canvassing support from political factions who are regional power brokers. For political parties, that's against the law. Future Forward, which launched in March, co-led by a university lecturer and a young business tycoon, is being seen as a party that can shake up Thai politics. But at the moment, it's powerless.
We are not allowed to campaign. We are not allowed to raise funds from the public at the moment. We are not allowed to seek supporters, more supporters. So it's unnormal, it's abnormal.
The government says political parties will be able to resume activities soon, and an election in February remains the target.
So far there is no change to the roadmap, but I don't use the word guarantee.
For protesters, that's not enough. They're planning to march on Government House to deliver a message to the Prime Minister that they want the military to return to barracks. Wayne Hay, Al Jazeera, Bangkok.
Well, the military in Thailand has seized power 12 times since the end of the absolute monarchy in 1932, and one of the more recent coups split the country into two camps. Thaksin Shinawatra was ousted as Prime Minister by the army in 2006 while he was out of the country. There had been months of demonstrations by the Yellow Shirts of the People's Alliance for Democracy. That's a group which opposed Thaksin and accused him of corruption. But 4 years later, it was the Red Shirts of the UDD, the United Front for Democracy Against Dictatorship, that rallied in his name, calling for the government to resign and for early elections. In 2011, the pro-Thaksin Pheu Thai party won a landslide victory and Shinawatra's sister Yingluck became Prime Minister. But within 3 years, she was out too in another military coup and fled the country. General Pheu Thai was named Prime Minister. Well, let's go to our guest now. Joining us from Bangkok is Sean Boonpracong, a former national security advisor for the deposed Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra. In Tokyo, Michael Montesano, coordinator of the Thailand Studies Programme at Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore, and in Khon Kaen, David Streckfuss, a historian and author of Truth on Trial in Thailand, Defamation, Treason and Lese-Majeste. A very warm welcome to all of you. Mr. Boonpracong, if I may start with you. Key Pheu Thai parties are accused of breaking the law after speaking out against the military. Protests expected tomorrow to mark 4 years since the military took power. So how worried will the military government be about this challenge to their rule? Protests are banned in Thailand.
Essentially, the resistance that has been simmering since the coup for the past 4 years really still are in force. The military have been successful at putting them at the outer edge of political arena. However, after the funeral of the previous king, and the new under the new reign, there appears to be more resistance at hand, and the student from 19 University vowed to make their voice heard by camping at the Prime Minister's office on the 22nd. And at this point, it's hard to tell how many will show up, but clearly huge satisfaction with the junta in how they manage the reform that they promised that would take place. Really hasn't. Corruption rises, and this is the Pheu Thai threat of imprisonment is one of the symptoms of society where a political divide are still in evidence despite of long suppression.
Mr. Streckfuss, let me bring you in now. We don't know how many people will show up to protest, but we know that the ones that do will be calling for elections, which the army says will take place in February. But do you think they will happen, given that they've been delayed 4 times now in the 4 years that the military has been in power?
I don't think there's any guarantee that there will be an election in February. The military has made many promises about when an election might happen. I don't believe that they will allow an election until they can make a realistic stake in the polls that don't make them lose face, at least, even though they may not win. And until that time comes, I don't think there will be an election.
Mr. Montesano, given the new constitution and the power that it does give the military, do you think that any election outcome would be a foregone conclusion? And if so, that this government would go ahead and hold that election?
Well, I agree with Dr. Streckfuss. I mean, this is a junta that is riding the tiger and hasn't figured out how to get off. And it is clearly still groping for a path that will lead to the result that it wants, which is somehow to have a prime minister, whether it's General Prayut or somebody else, to its liking. And we need to bear in mind that, yes, the Senate will play a large role in choosing the next prime minister. Yes, the prime minister could easily be somebody who is not a member of parliament, who hasn't faced the voters, but that doesn't in itself tell us what route the junta will follow in designing the party or parties that it expects to use as its base for support in the lower house.
Mr. Boonpracong, is that what General Pheu Thai is doing now, travelling around the country, making speeches, courting regional power brokers? Do you think it looks like he is campaigning while political parties are banned from doing so?
Well, that's exactly what the military want from the first place. Is called incumbency and take advantage of the financial mechanism which the government with its huge cash flow had used to suppress dissent. And there have been extraordinary allocation of 100 billion baht to give it to the local godfather to persuade them to join the newly found a military party, which would pursue more or less populist policy similar to what the Pheu Thai was doing, but now is okay. Essentially, they borrowed the playbook of Pheu Thai trying to win the hearts and mind of the people. And so far, we don't really know how successful it would be until the junta is confident that they could win it. But nevertheless, from what I know of the Pheu Thai voters in the rural area in the north and the northeast, they really haven't changed their mind, but nevertheless, they took comfort at the successful, more or less, winning in Malaysia. So now the military is under huge pressure just to make sure to guarantee the win in what way. And this is what we're trying to figure out, what they're trying to figure out themselves, just like Professor Montesano said.
Mr. Montesano, you know, for almost 20 years, Thai politics was divided between the Pheu Thai party, the Shinawatra family on one hand, and the sort of traditional elites represented by the army and the monarchy in the other. The Shinawats had won every election since 2001, but with them now in exile, who will their supporters get behind? General Pheu Thai has been courting them, but will they get behind the military who they've always opposed?
Well, we need to think about what sort of vehicle the military plans to use in contesting an election. We still don't know if there's going to be a military party, but the short answer to your question is no. It's very unlikely that rural people, the people whose eyes were opened through Thaksin and the parties that he founded, it's very unlikely that they will support what will be transparently a party that's serving as a vehicle for the same military junta that deposed Yingluck 4 years ago.
Mr. Streckfuss, how much has Thailand changed in the last 4 years since the military took over, when it was so divided between the so-called red shirts and yellow shirts? Do most Thai people still fall into one of those two categories, or have they moved beyond that?
Well, I think we have to go back further than that, because whatever happened with the yellow shirts and the red shirts really changed people's consciousness. So we talk about just merely the last 4 years. The military government has very little to show in terms of its reforms, so-called reforms. And so it's not making, I don't think it's made any headway here in the Northeast. When I talk to average folk, they'll still go with Pheu Thai or at least some other progressive party. And will reject, just like Dr. Montesano said, reject any sort of a hint of joining with the military.
Mr. Montesano, how much support would you say that the military still have after these 4 years?
I can't say directly, but what I would point out is this. It's a bit of a mischaracterization to say that this is somehow about the military and a royalist elite. We need to bear in mind that there is a Bangkok society, many of whose members are afraid of the Thai countryside. And this Bangkok society would like to see this process by which the junta returns the country to electoral democracy also be a process that brings security and that safeguards Bangkok interests vis-a-vis the interests of the countryside. And there is still in Bangkok tremendous interest, tremendous support for a process of elections that safeguards the interests of more affluent Bangkok voters vis-a-vis the demands of the rural majority in the country.
Mr. Boonpracong, you know, the Shinawats were so popular with the rural, with the poor, because they seem to represent their interests and they were the dominant force in Thai politics for so long, but do they still have any influence in the country, even though they're in exile, would you say?
It's, in terms of the support, is still pretty much the same political dynamic. Periodically, the Thai army did a poll, and based upon the previous, more or less, political system of American representation, or a little bit more to the parliamentary side, compared to it will be a little bit about German model in the future. The statistics always bear at 230 vote, 230 MPs that they've got. So that hasn't changed much. But that's also a new dynamic we really have to watch out for, which is the new introduction of Mr. Thanathorn of the New Futures Party. There are 6 million new votes. And from our poll that we do, all over 77 countries, the vote seems to be overwhelmingly for this new generation paradigm. And this is what the junta are unexpected. And they are pretty much a postponement of election is a part of this. Unless we could win it, we're not going to allow the election to go through. So those are two major elements. And plus, you have to remember that there are a different sentiment at work under this reign. There appears to be less a case against Lese-Majeste prosecution. There hasn't been in about 6 months. The only Office of Attorney General is allowed to do it. So we are getting to a new territory. There appear to be some sense of fairness and progress that we could take a glimpse at it. But until that unfolds within the next 12 months before the election, that it would be clearer.
Mr. Streckfuss, there are a number of new parties that are getting a lot of attention, including Future Forward's Thanathorn that Mr. Boonpracong is speaking about, who is even described as the sort of new Thaksin. But do you think that any of the new parties stand a fair chance given this constitution?
Well, when we look at electoral history in Thailand, there's always been a huge number of very small parties. So I think in this case, what will be most important is whether these more progressive pro-democracy parties can somehow form into some sort of coalition and somehow defeat the military in the elections. And so you know, every vote that goes to a new progressive party is one taken from another progressive party. So they're going to have to find some way for Pheu Thai, even Pheu Thai, the larger party, and these other smaller parties to come together in some fashion if they expect to gain any sort of influence in the House of Representatives.
Mr. Montesano, can you see that happening? Can you see these different parties with their various personalities getting together? And again, would the Constitution, which is so restrictive on political manoeuvring, allow that?
Well, there are two different issues. I do see the possibility of a coalition that needs these new progressive parties that, and as Dr. Streckfuss says, they'll be small, that needs these parties to, after they find their way into the House. But the important thing to say about this restrictive constitution is that it's not viable. This is not a constitution that can be successful in governing Thai society as we now have it in the long haul. So the rigidity of the Constitution and the effect of the Constitution in limiting the effect of the voters' will and of these parties will also be the Constitution's undoing.
But Mr. Boonpracong, on that note, how can this Constitution be challenged when those who have written it are in power?
The question that Professor Montesano raised is a really legitimate one, and this is a type of, at this point, the type of situation that Pheu Thai see and those democratic coalition, that how would they deal with it. I expect that they all want to be in the political table, so to speak. They might come in, and if they are successfully be part of the political process, there could be an introduction of a repeal of this problem. And I think that the Mr. Thanathorn party has indicated that would be the case. The Pheu Thai is trying to not revealing their card too soon at this moment. So they were hoping just to be allowed to have an election period rather than facing with no end result, military postponed indefinitely on the election date, and so far they have no future. So they are just trying to play possum and trying to just get back into the game, and that's the final word.
And Mr. Boonpracong, are either of the Shinawats planning on getting back in the game, or are they well and truly out of Thai politics now?
I think that he's at his age, he's happy if he's allowed to come back home, but the most important point is he's the most important dynamic that all Thais, Bangkokian, the powerful establishment have to deal with. How, unless he's dealt with in the fairness, we Thailand would always be in this position. So that's up for a challenge that I think that under this reign, there are some hope for all sides that the system would be administrated fairly. Is almost the ultimate goal, that he's a big 600-pound gorilla question that need to be addressed.
Mr. Streckfuss, a last question to you before I get to Mr. Montesano. Is the military here to stay for now?
Well, I have a few more comments on that, but okay, we'll start with that.
Sure, go ahead.
I mean, the military is already built into the constitutional framework an absolute, a very strong possibility that the majority will not be able to run Thailand in the future democratically. So it's already designed against parties, popular parties. And as to what Sean said about the monarchy, I don't think we necessarily need to see the monarchy as in step absolutely with the military. It could be for its own long-range reasons that the monarchy may want to try to create popularity, legitimacy, and a more sustainable view of the monarchy on its own terms, outside of the monarchy.
Mr. Montesano, that is introducing a whole nother dynamic late in the program, but let me ask you this. What does all of this mean, especially just how entrenched the military is now for democracy in Thailand?
I continue to believe that there have been social forces developing in Thailand, as Dr. Streckfuss said at the beginning of the discussion, social forces developing in Thailand for many years now that are not commensurate with the restrictive system that the Thai army would like to foist on the country. And the lack of fit between this restrictive system and those social forces mean that this restrictive system cannot prove enduring without continuing tensions and continuing stresses in Thai society.
Gentlemen, it is a pleasure to get all of your thoughts. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you to all our guests, Sean Boonpracong, Michael Montesano and David Streckfuss. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Elizabeth Puranam, and the whole team here, bye for now.